Well, Bill Cosby may now get a shot at freedom. Yesterday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed to hear his appeal for his 2018 sexual assault conviction. Joining us to weigh in is victims' rights advocate Gloria Allred, co-founder of Allred, Morocco, and Goldberg. Gloria, does this raise the possibility his conviction might be overturned?
There is that possibility. You're right about that. What the court agreed to decide were two very, very significant issues in the Bill Cosby criminal case. One issue had to do with whether the testimony of prior bad act witnesses who testified to what were uncharged crimes, whether that testimony was more prejudicial than probative or more probative than prejudicial, whether it should have been admitted or not. Of course, whenever evidence is introduced by the prosecution, it is going to be prejudicial to the defendant. That's why it's introduced. But is it more probative than prejudicial, more likely to lead to the truth? If it is, then it doesn't violate any admission of evidence standard. And so that is the issue. I represented the majority of the 5 prior bad act witnesses who testified at the Bill Cosby criminal case. And I think it was important that their testimony be admitted into the case so the jury could find the truth. And it was relevant not to cast aspersions on the character of Bill Cosby, but on the issue of absence of mistake. In other words, was Mr. Cosby mistaken about whether Andrea Constant, the victim in the case, in fact agreed, consented to sexual acts against her by Mr. Cosby? If in fact the jury believed that he had a pattern and a practice of drugging and sexually assaulting women, then he wasn't mistaken about whether Andrea Constant consented. He knew that if a woman is drugged or under the influence of alcohol, she can't give consent, and therefore it was unlawful. It was aggravated, indecent sexual assault, and that's what he was convicted of.
Yeah, Gloria, if they grant this appeal, and if the result was they didn't approve of that testimony, would it lead to a retrial, or would it be tossed out as a conviction?
Well, great question. And the answer is we don't know what they'll do. We don't know whether they'll think this was harmless or not. The court in the past in Pennsylvania has decided that under certain circumstances, the testimony of prior bad act witnesses can be admitted in a criminal case. It has to meet certain requirements. Here, the prosecution actually asked to be allowed to put 19 prior bad act witnesses on the stand, but the court only allowed 5, didn't say why these 5 or why only 5. So we'll see what happens. By the way, Cosby also has been allowed by the Supreme Court this week to argue another important issue, and that is whether his testimony in his civil deposition in the lawsuit that Andrea Constant had filed against him, his testimony that he did give quaaludes to women prior to having sex with them, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially it, whether that should have been admitted in the criminal case. He said no. He says that violated his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, that he alleges he was promised by a prior prosecutor that he wouldn't be prosecuted, and that's why he testified in the civil case. Had he thought he could be prosecuted, essentially, again, by another DA, he wouldn't have testified. So that is another argument that the Supreme Court will hear.
Gloria, what's the timeline look like for this?
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has not said when it will grant a hearing for these two important issues to be argued. So we'll have to wait and see. But certainly, you know, we're very interested in the result. Again, it's important to emphasize they haven't said that they will, when they hear argument, find in favor of Mr. Cosby, or if they do, whether the decision, whether the conviction will be reversed, or whether it will be, he'll be granted a new trial or not. But it is important that they have decided that they will hear these two issues and decide these two issues. Hopefully that is going to be soon. I still have a civil lawsuit against Mr. Cosby pending on behalf of my client in California, in Santa Monica, in which my client alleged she was the victim of child sexual abuse by Mr. Cosby at the Playboy Mansion. But we are waiting the outcome of the criminal case before this case is set for trial. So
okay,
we'll have to wait and see.
All right, Gloria, thank you. Shedding a lot of light on this issue, these issues. Thank you so much for joining us.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing news channel, now in 65 million homes. Get Newsmax TV on all the major cable systems or go to newsmaxtv.com and click on the Find Newsmax tab to locate us. Remember, Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.